This Sunday, as we close the year, the job market remains tight. Our nation and our states have more job vacancies than applicants. So, what's going on?
What we're starting to see is that things have at least stabilized from an economic standpoint. And as you said, wages are increasing.
What will it take to get more workers working? And can employers afford it? Plus, a new guide to the hot jobs in the coming decade, how to land one, and what they will pay. Inside today's labor market and what might lie ahead, here on our Sunday program. Good morning, everyone, and Merry Christmas. I'm Stuart Ledbetter, and this is NBC5 In Depth. This morning, we're taking a look inside one of the big questions we face if our economy is to fully recover from the pandemic. Where did all the workers go? Yeah, there has been significant rebound, but Vermont and the nation are not yet back to where we were in 2019. The labor shortage driving up wages, especially at the lower end of the pay scale. This morning, insights from two labor analysts who spend their work weeks thinking about everyone else's. Joining us this morning, Michael Harrington. He's the commissioner of the Vermont Department of Labor, and he's joined by Matt Barowitz, an economist, also with the department, who provides folks like us with monthly insight into the labor market. And we'd like to welcome you both to NBC5 In Depth.
Great. Thank you, Stuart.
Good to have you. The question that I've been hearing for 2 years now is, where did everybody go? We do see some recovery in the labor force participation rate, but I'm wondering how far below where we were pre-pandemic are we closing out this year?
Sure. I'll let Matt speak to the details, but to the broader question of where everybody went, I think it's a variety of different reasons. Mainly, one of the biggest pieces for Vermont is that with an aging population already, when we hit this pandemic, a lot of individuals took that as an opportunity to leave the workforce. Either they were beyond retirement age or at retirement age. Some may have even been right before retirement age, but they saw this as an opportunity, whether it be for family or health reasons, to care for loved ones, as an opportunity to leave the workforce. I think that would be probably the biggest contributor. It doesn't mean that they won't ever come back, and some have chosen to come back out of retirement now that things have settled a little bit. But we've also seen that, again, people, families where there may have been dual income, one of the individuals within that family may have stepped away from the workforce to care for a child or for an aging adult. So again, there were a couple different reasons that contributed to this. It was not like one thing just wiped out a large portion of the workforce, many different contributing factors. Some took it as an opportunity to go back to school and broaden their education. I think what we do know is that there's just a lot of churn and movement within the workforce that may have been relatively steady prior to the pandemic. So again, there's a lot of individuals who are using this opportunity maybe to advance their job and work opportunities by leaving jobs and moving to other jobs. So again, that would show up maybe as a lot of vacancies, but it is also just a lot of moving around as well. And to the point of, whether we've seen people leave the state or come into the state, I think overall we saw the pandemic as somewhat of a net positive for people relocating to the state. Whether that stays true indefinitely, it's hard to know. But, I'll turn to Matt just to share a little bit more about the details.
Thank you, Commissioner. I agree. Overall, what we're seeing is the demographic pressures we've been talking about in this state for many years. In total, the labor force in the state of Vermont is about down 20,000 people compared to pre-pandemic, so 2019 relative to 2022. And what that translates to in a difference of labor force participation rate of something in the order of just under 67% labor force participation rate for the state of Vermont to just under 62% labor force participation rate for the state of Vermont. And that change of about 5 percentage points is significant in this short period of time. And it's a function of the calculation, because the calculation itself says, starts with the population over the age of 16 in the state of Vermont. That's a determining factor. We don't include anyone under the age of 16 in the labor force because they can't traditionally work. But you never age out of the labor force calculation. And so to the commissioner's point, what we're seeing is that demographic pressure associated with the aging of the baby boomers. The leading edge of the baby boomers turned 65 in 2011. You march that forward 10 years to 2021, that means the leading edge of the baby boomers was turning 75 in the first year of COVID. And the labor force participation rate of somebody 75 is much lower than someone 65.
So some of this is organic, and some of it might be pandemic induced. People became quite reflective about their careers and what they wanted to do with the rest of their working lives. But in October, the department put out new unemployment statistics that showed that Vermont's jobless rate rose 0.2, not a ton, but it was the first time the number had gone up in a couple of years. What do I make of that? What happened? Commissioner?
I'll go ahead, Matt. I'm happy to jump in.
What we're seeing is that the national number has been kind of bouncing around a little bit. And so there was a national increase as well. So Vermont is not an anomaly in this. There was a number of states that saw a rise in the unemployment rate. And, perspective is really important here. We're talking about an unemployment rate that was at 2.1%. So the increase to 2.3%, while that is a noticeable increase, because it is an increase, the first time in a while, and 2.2 tenths of a percentage point increase is noticeable. But we are still sub 3%, still sub 4% unemployment, which in most traditional economic frameworks is considered tight labor market conditions. So we're still a very far distance away from thinking that we are in any sort of looser economic conditions. We still have very tight labor market conditions, meaning the availability and supply of labor is quite low. And this is reflected in the data throughout.
Sure. Well, the Fed has made no secret of its campaign to try to slow the economy down, to slow down this red hot labor market. Does that factor into what we saw in the October jobless number here?
It may. I always caution people, 1 month does not equal a trend. So we're certainly going to be looking at the next couple of months. And really, since we are towards the end of the year, what my team will do as we turn into January and February, we'll actually reopen up all of 2022 and look at data that wasn't previously available and reevaluate all the estimates previously provided with our federal partners. So it'll be interesting to see what 2022 showed. For the most part, we saw 9 months of very strong positive trends in not only the labor force, but also in decreasing unemployment, as we talked about. October being the first kind of course correction, even though it was quite small with on the labor force side of a decline of only 72.
So before I move on, we're about 20,000 fewer workers in our state than we were pre-pandemic, but we have regained a lot of what we had lost at the peak of the pandemic. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that is correct. Right as the pandemic started, I think we saw a very, very large decrease, many more in tens of thousands. For several months, we were looking at being down about 30,000. And so I think over the course of this year and the latter part of 2021, we're now back to down 20,000, which is still significant. If you think about that in terms of if you're a Vermont employer and you're trying to recruit either to backfill positions that might be vacated by people leaving or exiting the labor force, or trying to grow your business. And we see that in the jobs openings data, which shows record high numbers of job openings in the state of Vermont as well.
Still, as we hit the fourth quarter of the year.
Correct.
The department, Commissioner, this summer and fall launched pretty unprecedented effort to try to connect those who might be looking for a job or a better job with employers in our state. Did that bear fruit? Do you know yet?
Yeah, and I want to dovetail off of what was being said earlier in that, one of the pieces that our governor has mentioned time and time again, and I think we all agree, we just probably it's too far in the rearview mirror to really remember, but we had a labor force shortage before we hit the pandemic as well. And so we already had employers that were struggling to find qualified talent leading into the pandemic. And all the pandemic did was exacerbate a problem that was already there. And I think what also came out of the pandemic was not necessarily just a loss of individuals potentially, but we also saw this pent up demand, which caused employers to want to grow their operations. And so you had a growing of job opportunities and a shrinking of available labor, which created this kind of dual challenge for our labor market to fill. To your point, the department had to start thinking about more creative ways it needed to link job seekers with employers. And so beyond just the typical job fairs, which we continued to hold in 2021 and then throughout 2022, we moved to a virtual model during the pandemic and have slowly come back to in-person models. But we started looking at different ways, whether it's through promotion and marketing, but also looking to meet people where they are. And so one of the more unique opportunities we had was posting up a job or a hiring event at baseball games across the state. And that was one way where we knew there'd be a population of people already attending, and we were able to work with employers to have them set up booths within the park to capture as many people as possible and engage them. Because again, it may not be just the person who's looking for a job, but it's likely that those individuals know somebody, a family member, a young adult, a friend who is also looking for a job. And so again, it was more about getting the word out and creating contact points for potential job seekers and employers. But again, having to think creatively, because there is such this a shortening of the labor market and a challenge in finding available talent. I think it's also important to point out, we talk about the unemployment rate going up, and I just want to clarify for folks too, the unemployment rate does not necessarily directly correlate to the number of people receiving unemployment benefits. And so I think people automatically assume that the unemployment rate goes up or that there's a number of people not in the workforce because they're collecting unemployment benefits. And the two actually don't relate to one another at all. The unemployment rate is derived from a survey conducted by Vermont households by the U.S. Census Bureau. And it far exceeds the number of people who are actually collecting benefits. At one point, we had somewhere around 7,500 to 8,000 unemployed Vermonters by definition, but really only about 1,700 to 2,000 people collecting unemployment benefits. So again, that number of people collecting benefits is much, much smaller than what actually is calculated into the unemployment rate.
All right, fair point. Let's take a break. We're talking this morning about Vermont's labor market, and in a moment, its rising median wage with the Commissioner for the Department of Labor and Labor Department economist Matt Barowitz. We'll be right back. We're back this morning talking about the job market, the tight labor market that continues to challenge employers here and around the country. Let me ask about the minimum wage for the lowest paid Vermonter. That number is going up January 1 to $13.18. How is that number calculated? How did we get to that figure?
Yeah, I'll let Matt talk about the calculation, but we did see the number increase a little bit. Sometimes the actual increase is dictated in statute, and other times it's calculated based on a specific formula outlined in state statute. Matthew?
Yeah, Commissioner, you're correct. Sometimes the legislature will set a price floor, is what we call as economists, and other times the existing legislation will kick in, which is what happened this year, which is absent intervention or a legislative intervention. It is determined based on the change in the consumer price index, which is commonly referred to as inflation. Interestingly, that there is a provision in Vermont state minimum wage law that says it is the annual change in the consumer price index or 5%, whichever is smaller.
Yeah.
And normally, in regular economic times, it is the change in the consumer price index. But as we know, inflation has been hot lately. And as a result, this one, the increase calculated coming into effect for 2023 is based on the 5% because it was lower than the actual change in the consumer price index.
Well, I don't know how many pay minimum wage. I tell the story about how I drive past a McDonald's on the way to work, and they have a sandwich board out front that offers $18 an hour starting pay. So is that minimum wage relevant? Do you know how many people earn it?
We don't have a good estimate of how many people earn it. We've looked into that in the past. What we've seen, at least in the last few years, due to increased competition for labor, is that it is having less and less impact on the marketplace. Certain industries, it has more of an impact, but even for areas or occupations that are typically thought of as lower, we're seeing that they're paying above minimum wage pretty regularly. And the opportunities for advancement are quick, including signing bonuses. And it's not just even straight compensation in the form of cash, but tuition reimbursement, all sorts of different incentives and benefit packages to entice people into the labor market.
Yeah, boy. I mean, we've never seen it like this before with some of the chain restaurants, for example, Federal Express around the corner with just as you described. I'm wondering, Commissioner, does that disadvantage, a mom and pop employer that might be, less able to pay that market rate when up against, a large national chain?
Yeah, I think it is always a balancing act. And I think that has always been the contention about artificially increasing the minimum wage based on legislation, because it doesn't, in those cases, it doesn't always track with inflation or demand. And so it is a challenge, especially in Vermont, where we have so many small businesses or mom and pop shops, as you had called them. But I think in this case, what we are finding is whether they are small shops, medium or large organizations, the demand for services is still driving what the employer can pay for a starting wage. And so, again, even on the smaller business side, they're still seeing unprecedented demand for their services and are able to pay what the going rate is. I think the concern would be as things maybe normalize or start to tail off, we see demand start to slow. We will have this, we've now kind of set this this price point for starting wages, and whether or not those businesses will continue to be able to pay those wages is something that remains to be seen. Well,
the department this fall released a list of hot jobs, for lack of a better term, that for which you see long-term, demand and something that younger Vermonters coming up can make a career out of. Only a couple of minutes, but give me a sense of what's on the list.
Yeah, so Matt can share about the list, but I will just say that it's been a great partnership we've had over the years with the McClure Foundation. Between the two of us, we identify what are those highest prospective jobs over the next 10 years. Matt can share a little bit about what's on the list and how we came to those.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. We try and put it in a way that's approachable for job seekers to try and help them better understand where they might best fit into the job world. There's so many occupations out there. Just to give you a flavor, we're looking at things like teachers, carpenters, nurses, bookkeepers. And each one of those is very different in the work environment, the skills necessary. And what we try and highlight in this brochure is this is not a message that everyone needs 4 years of schooling after high school. No, there's many pathways forward through career technical education, through apprenticeships, through even just high school programs that focused and done in partnership with other training opportunities to put yourself on a pathway towards economic independence and long-term economic success with good training and a good focus and an understanding of the opportunities in the state, because there are so many out there. And that's what we're trying to do, is just make sure that message is getting out to all Vermonters and people interested in living in Vermont, that there are good jobs here.
It's a good place to probably ask you one final question. How long will it be before we achieve, Matt, what economists call equilibrium, once again, where we don't have help wanted signs or sorry, we're short staffed today and are closing early signs everywhere you go? What do you think?
Oh, that is the million-dollar question. I wish I had the perfect answer for it. Things are always in flux. Just take a look at what happened with COVID in March of 2020. No one saw that coming. We were looking at a strong economic growth, a period of historic economic expansion across the country and the state. And then out of nowhere, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. So I think what we're starting to see is that things have at least stabilized from an economic standpoint. And as you said, wages are increasing and the message is getting out there of the opportunities. And now it's just a question of, getting that quote unquote equilibrium back in place, which is delicate.
Yeah. How about you, Commissioner? You want to make a prediction? Will we be saying the same thing a year from now?
I don't know if I can make a prediction. I think the one thing I will say is that we hope that there's always jobs available for those people who want them. The last thing we want to see is any type of shortage in the job market where people are laid off and unemployed for a long period of time. So the best thing for us is that our employers continue to grow, but we've got to figure out how to grow our labor force as well. We'll continue to do that.
Michael Harrington, the Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Labor, and Matt Barowitz, economist with the department. It's been our pleasure. Thanks for being with us on NBC5 In Depth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For more on those hot jobs, head to VermontJobLink.com. And just as we went to tape, the Labor Department announced that Vermont's November unemployment rose for a second consecutive month to 2.5%. Next, another example of the shortage of labor challenging the Salvation Army at Christmas time. Finally, one of the iconic sounds of the Christmas season, those bells ringing outside malls and grocery stores on behalf of the Salvation Army. If it seems there are fewer out ringing those bells this year, well, there are. Chapters across the nation facing real worker shortages. Here's Jack Thurston now on how they're managing.
You can hear them before you see them.
How are you today?
Charlie Bloom holding court outside the Walmart in St. Albans.
Every little bit counts.
With gratitude on his lips.
Thank you very much.
And that famous, instantly recognizable Salvation Army bell in his hand.
We all grew up with it.
Problem is,
Thank you very much.
The chapter serving northwestern Vermont has a shortage of ringers.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Explaining the folks it pays to staff its kettles are as hard to come by as workers in many other fields these days.
Everybody's struggling to get back to normal again.
And volunteers seem in short supply too. COVID also apparently reset some of their patterns.
They know that it's Christmas time when they hear that bell.
Salvation Army Lieutenant Caitlin Lyle says the Greater Burlington chapter has just 6 ringers this year.
There you go.
It would like to have 2 or 3 times as many.
Good job.
This year, we have definitely felt that shortage.
But she tells us, despite the challenge, caring communities keep coming through, putting the chapter about halfway to its $50,000 seasonal fundraising goal, with still 2 weeks to go.
Merry Christmas.
There's not a lot of Charlies this year.
No, there aren't. And I appreciate Charlie for being out here so much. It's cold, but it's such a great cause.
Ding, 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 ding.
Cash collected funds meal services, a food pantry, emergency aid, and even toy distribution for children of disadvantaged neighbors.
The bell ringers that we have, they're resilient, right? They're motivated. They want to keep going. They want to help raise the funds for the community.
Throw right in there.
And already, plans are in the works for a robust ringer recruitment push next year. Charlie Bloom will likely be back, sounding the Salvation Army's distinctive plea for help in combating poverty.
A lot of people are putting money in that bucket. They're helping. Have a great day, huh?
In St. Albans, Jack Thurston, NBC 5 News.
With thanks to Charlie Bloom, that's our program for this Christmas Sunday. I'm Stuart Ledbetter. For all of us here at NBC 5, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.